This time on Rad Rat Video, we're learning all about Grind King the brand and Grind King the dude. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Rad Rat Video, the channel where you can learn something new about skateboarding 3 times a week. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I do a video about skateboarding history, skateboarding culture, skateboarding video games, answering your questions on Ask Rad Rat, and this newer series called Brand Breakdowns. The original idea for this series was to do Grind King, and I ended up getting the sequel one done first. I'll talk about why at the end, but the Grind King system was something really interesting that came up in my research before. What a lot of people probably don't know is that Grind King was originally just a kingpin. It was not an individual truck. So the founder of Grind King, Donald Castle, he took the kingpin design as it was, inverted it, had that rounded off edge that had an Allen wrench hole in the top, and it was smaller, it was lower profile, and it was a lot heavier duty steel. And it was not its own truck for a couple years. And that was kind of interesting. I've got a quote about it. So since what I created was a grinding kingpin, I shortened the 2 words to name my product Grind King. And Donald, from another article I found, was later called the Grind King in the industry in the 90s. So back in 1988, the year I was born, Donald Castle was 26 years old, and he was going to be a land developer, and he never did, although hold on to that little nugget for a second. And he came up with this idea of doing that inverted kingpin. And he went to a trade show in 1988, started showing them around to some people. Next thing he knew, he had sold 1,000 of them. And this was going to be a little part-time thing he did out of his garage or his basement or whatever, but he ended up turning it into a real business just because he couldn't keep up with orders. The Grind King bolts were expensive to make. I used the best steel alloy I could find. Originally, the washer was machined and the bolt was partly machined and partly cold-headed. Cold-heading is the process of forming something to shape under extreme pressure. I sold the kits for like $12.95, although people warned me I wouldn't be able to do it. Regular kingpins were selling for less than a couple of bucks. So that is a regular skateboard branded kingpin, but if you were to just go to a hardware store, I found from another source it was more like 60 cents. So $12.95 in 1988 is $27.37 in today's money. Imagine spending that much on an accessory for your truck. You could almost buy a full set of trucks for that much. But that wasn't the problem. He did have some other problems though. First one was that it wasn't compatible with every single truck. Being a third-party accessory, other truck companies weren't designing their trucks around his kingpin, so it didn't always match perfectly. But the other big problem was having counterfeits. So what other brands would do, they would make something of cheaper steel, they would steal his design but not the quality of it, and they would break really easily, and it kind of gave him a bad name in the marketplace. So what did he do? He decided to make his own truck. And he started in 1990 making some clay models and figuring out exactly what it would do. And in September 1991, he released his first model. I started out with a pretty different looking truck. The kingpin, the funky curved base plate, it was only mildly successful. Funky how? Well, it had a hollowed out curved base plate and the axles would slip pretty much immediately. It didn't sell all that well, so he rushed to get a second model out within only a few months. It was really a weird one. I had all these innovations. I went overboard. I had a floating axle that would slide back and forth, and it had the threads on the inside instead of on the outside. Allen screws went in the end to hold the wheels on, and it had these funky bushings with like corrugation. It was either ahead of its time or out in left field too far. This second model also bombed pretty much immediately, but he had another big problem. Around this time in '92, the truck companies all switched to the new bolt pattern, except for him. And the problem with his curved base plates is that he couldn't just drill new holes into it and adapt to the new style. And he also had this other insert that he made that would go, I'm not sure, I wasn't able to find a picture of this, but it was able to protect the bolts. So the reason why they switched to the new bolt pattern, the base plate was the same size, but the holes were further in, and that protected the bolts and the nuts from hitting the ledge if you do a no slide. No slides are still pretty new. So he was left with all these trucks and also with his inserts that he made that were no longer compatible with what anybody had. So he had to rush to make a third model. I went back to a more conventional design. People dug them because they were really light. I think as wild as skaters are portrayed, they're really conservative in their buying habits. They don't want to stray too far from the norm. So the lightness was a good thing for a lot of skaters, but for a lot of pros, they didn't like it. So they had gotten up to this point in their careers with big heavy trucks, and they didn't want to make a huge change. There would be time that it would take to adapt to them and everything like that. And they weren't as popular with the team as they were with regular skaters. This is from an interview. "They're too light," he tried to assure the skater that light was better. "No," the pro had said, "I'm used to heavy, I want heavy." Although this lightness was generally a good thing, this particular design that he made was a little bit too weak. And so hardcore skaters, he said, would be able to break them. But regardless of that, they were finally successful and his company started to take off. In 1992, he made $100,000 in profit and was starting to hire people and get a warehouse and really get things going. This is when he took on the name of the Grind King, although that was from a newspaper article and not a skate magazine. So who knows how much that actually was used, but that's what they call them. And around that time, he started to diversify and start new companies. He started Hazmat Skateboards with Eric Dressen, and I was not able to find much about this brand. There's another brand that's more recent that's also called Hazmat. I don't think it's related to it. That doesn't seem like it stayed around for that long. But he did start Hazmat Snowboards, which was relatively successful until that also got pirated. People would make fake copies of it, called it Hazmate, and kind of put him out of business because they were making cheaper snowboards with that same name. But one of the reasons why the trucks were getting to be more and more successful was the style of advertising that they would use. So for most brands, both in trucks and in anything else, they would always talk about their team. You know, this guy uses my truck, therefore it's the best. They wouldn't really advertise the truck itself, and that's what he did. He worked with a marketing guy, and he would talk about the actual features of the truck and advertise the truck itself. And Don worked on continuing to make the product better and better. In 1994, the GK4 was released, which solved a lot of these strength issues that the GK3 had. In 1996, the GK5 came out. It's a very small change where they moved the center nib of the base plate a little bit in. Not a big deal, but they released the high version of the truck, and he said that that was a really great seller. In 1999, the GK6 came out, and this was a complete redesign. It had a brand new kingpin and bushing setup, had a lot beefier axle, although it was also lighter. So a pretty big upgrade at that time. But all throughout the 90s up until this point, he had started a lot of other brands, through the 80s and the 90s in fact, because he was also responsible for bridge bolts. I've talked about them a few times on the channel, like the weird gimmicks video I made, that's right here. I finally figured out what the reason for these were, and in theory, it was just to have fewer parts. So yeah, the board's gonna be heavier because you have this extra bit of metal that connects the two bolts. It's also gonna get in the way of trying to do tricks, but it simplifies the amount of parts that are in your skateboard box or whatever. So that was the point of that. But he started those, and he had a lot of other companies like Society Skateboards, Brian Queen Apparel, Belladonna Women's Clothing, Underdog Shoes, Von Dutch, Termite kid-sized skateboards. These were not only smaller in size, but they actually had fewer plies to be lighter. So just a scaled down beginner kid skateboard. You may remember those from back in the day. He also started Creeper trucks. You may remember these. These were very heavy looking. They were glow in the dark. They were shaped like a spider web and they had a skull in them. They came out with a skate video. Apparently they were very heavy duty and really tough. I always thought that they were some kind of outsider joke brand, or like maybe something you'd put on a cruiser, not really a performance truck, you know? But people who skated them at the time, I've seen some reviews, they said that they were really good and they were really heavy duty and tough. So I don't know, I had no idea that they were related to Grind King at the time, but those were something that he did. He had so many brands, in fact, that he had to start Dark Horse Distribution as a parent company that went over all of these different brands. Next, in 2002, Grind King released the GK Axle, which was their high-end premium type of truck that solved a lot of problems with trucks in general, like slipping axles. So if you started skating after this point, you probably never even seen this axle slip before. I never had it personally happen, I've seen it once. It's where the axle actually kind of slips so that there's more axles sticking out on one side than the other. But he finally solved it with this truck. So what he did was take the axle, flattened it out a little bit, and then had it bend and then put holes in it to save weight. And that way there is no way that that thing could move at all. But there was a major problem with the tooling. So if you cast a truck and you have the axle and it's turned a little bit, it makes no difference, right? If it's just a straight line. but if it has a shape and you turn it a little bit, then it'll stick out of the metal. So he had to get people from the outside to come in, different kinds of engineers, and work on solving this problem. And he would never say exactly what they did, but they were able to finally figure out how they did that. And that was a pretty cool advancement. On top of that, it also had a locking bolt under the base plate that let you swap bushings without having to take the truck off. Very small thing, I don't know how many people use that, but that was another option. Next up was the GK7, and that came out in 2004. It had a redesigned hanger shape, a kingpin sleeve nut for stability, a lower kingpin, new bushings, and he also launched Thunderbird longboard trucks. And then after that was the Axle 2, which was the peak of innovation in skateboarding trucks once again. It was lighter and stronger than the original axle. It had a hard top bushing that had no break-in period. They were so good that he sold them separately because people wanted them so much. It had a concave bushing seat where they meet in the middle, which made it more stable and more durable. A smaller kingpin head, a radial-shaped hanger that curved for better grind control, stronger base plate, which was redesigned for no slides. Now, I see all this stuff and I think, who's really doing that today? What truck brand still in business is really doing new things? Tensors going really low and really light, and they had slider plates and all that kind of stuff, and the nibs that dig into your board. But who else is really doing new things like these guys were back then? I can't really think of anyone. So it's pretty cool, and it's weird that they're the ones that went out of business. But they also did some really weird stuff, such as the Velvet series. I remember seeing these back in the day, and I did not understand the point. So it had this textured paint job on it, and you would think that that would interfere with grinds. That's not gonna make it grind smoother, right? I was never brave enough to try them. Where I grew up, there were no skate shops. I couldn't go feel what they were like or anything, but I never got the point of those. But one thing that I did get the point of, stupidly, was the Grind King Dubs series. So these came with these axle nuts that had a rim on them. Point of it was to keep dirt out of your bearings. And I bought these back in the day. I think I just bought the nuts separately, but back in the day, rims were the coolest thing in the world. You know, even on your cars and everything, every rapper was talking about, you know, their 24s and all that kind of stuff. And looking back on it, it's so stupid that anyone cared about that. But that's what they had for trucks. They were doing Velvet, they were doing Dubs. Neither of these things really made a lot of sense for skateboarding, but they still lived on for a few more years. The last news article I was able to find about Grind King at all was in 2008 when Joy Brzezinski and Danny Supa left the team. So what happened after that? I don't know. There's no press releases, there's no news articles, there's really nothing that talks about where Grind King went and how it died out. They had an official blog and it stopped updating in July 2010. And there are comments on there, people asking about why they're not getting answers, why they can't find them anymore, why they aren't getting replies to their requests for replacements or warranties and things like that. And they just kind of fell off the map. So I think it's really weird that you can't find a news article. You would think Transworld or Thrasher or somebody would have reported on it, but they just haven't. So to look it up, I figured I would look up Don Castle today and see where he is, maybe try to talk to him, and I was able to find him. So there's a lot of people with that name on Facebook, but one of them is actually still using an @grindking.com email address. So I was able to find him, and he's actually doing land development. So something he wanted to do way back in the day, he was posting to a local group in LA about finding an architect. So I don't know exactly what he's doing, but I think he's finally into the field that he originally thought he was going to be going into 30 years ago. But since he posted his email address publicly on Facebook, I decided to send him an email and ask him what happened to Grind King, what about all these other brands, where are you today, what's going on, and this is what he said. Yep, that's it. He never answered. Most people I reach out to do not answer, and I gave him a lot of time. This is why this video came out so much later, even though this was the original idea for the series, because I was waiting for an answer that never came. So I don't know a lot about the exact details of how Grind King closed, but it's pretty clear that they're gone. Interesting fact though, while I was researching this video, the Grind King website was still up. You could go there, you go to the team page, and you can see, you know, they'd post YouTube videos of the different pros on their team and all that stuff. And I think it had copyright 2009 on the bottom last time it was updated. But After I emailed him, I checked back on the site for something and it's down now. So it's kind of weird. I don't think I had anything to do with it, but I did say I'm doing a YouTube video about Grind King and suddenly the website goes down. Again, probably nothing to do with me. Maybe I don't know, he didn't renew it finally or something, but it's kind of weird. So there's not a lot of information left to find at this point. But if you know anything else about Grind King and where it went and what the problems were in the end, let me know below. I'd be very interested to find out more about that. But until next time, here's some more videos I did recently. I have a lot more different series I do. This brand breakdowns one. I do a lot of other different stuff. You can learn more about skateboarding 3 times a week. Tap my logo right here on screen to subscribe so you can stay up to date with all that stuff. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.